Nobody was prepared for a pandemic to hit the world. The last pandemic that the world knew was in 1918, and it killed between 21 million to 100 million people. We have no recollection of that in this generation. Only those in the greatest generation must have a recollection of it. They would be above 85 now, so there are very few of them who actually experienced the second pandemic in the form of COVID 19. It only killed 7 million people, which is very small compared to the earlier numbers. The 1918 influenza must have also caused dramatic impact in the young generation, that is the greatest generation in those days, that but we wouldn't know. There are very few of them who are still around. However, the COVID-19 pandemic is very fresh, still in our minds. The effect it had on health is a bygone now, same as the effect it has on the economy. Most of the nations have recovered, and there are sporadic breaks of corona here and there, but it's just localized, and so it has never reached a stage of a pandemic. At most, it's epidemic. However, the effect it had on the social skills and the cognitive skills of Generation Z is still affecting them. You can see it in the form of a spike in the curve as shown in the diagram under the corona lockdown row. There was effects on the millennials also, because they could not get jobs, and the 2 years that they should have gotten internships and started networking to build a career, they had to spend locked down. However, once the lockdowns were lifted and the economy came back to its original growth rate, the millennials were able to get back into their careers. So the effect on career was very limited. In the case of Generation Alpha, the effect was that they were overprotected, and with the lack of school time, they got more glued on their mobile phones. Still, the effect is limited, and they still have got a lot of time to improve their intellectual capacities. The worst hit was the Generation Z. Instead of going to school, they were stuck at home, and there was online school and college, yes, but somehow the presence of the teacher was not felt in the bedrooms. The learning and the acquisition of the skills couldn't occur from online classes. What happened as a result is that those students who were in class 5 to class 10 during the corona lockdown lost the intellectual skills of spelling correctly, using punctuations at the right places, making easy calculations, deriving formulas, making sense of scientific laws, were not able to develop. On top of that, there was no exams to put a pressure on them to learn and practice the skills and their memories. Many students got promoted without exams. Consequently, those students got into the higher classes without basic language and mathematical skills. They also did not have the skills of following procedures to solve problems and rules of grammar, because they never received the feedback that they would have if there was a physical class from the teacher. Also, they did not develop the conceptual thinking capacities, because they did not have the time to explore the subjects with other friends and teachers. As there was no time to even study, they could not develop the ability to apply what they learned in various aspects of their lives, like having a discussion about politics with their friends, or even doing projects to demonstrate Faraday's law of electricity and magnetism. But nonetheless, they were promoted for good reasons. Consequently, we have millions of students who have the cognitive capacity of the last grade that they were in before coronavirus lockdown. It is very sad, especially for teachers of grade 11 and 12 and even bachelor's degree, because they have inherited a generation Z that can neither calculate nor comprehend properly. So that is the effect of the corona lockdown on studies of Generation Z, especially. Another parameter that is related to the corona to some extent is the rising trend of poor habits across the generations. In my Generation X, every school inculcated in the students strong habits. Some of them I already shared with you in the discipline subsection about my sleeping ritual of not wearing undergarments. But over the years, everybody became empowered and entitled. And so even the institutions had got to loosen up the concept of having to abide to strict discipline or habits. We all know how habits are formed, at least in the old generation before the millennials. You need to have a trigger, then there must be a ritual, and finally there must be a reward. You can read more of that from the book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Corona lockdown again is the culprit in destroying the habits of older generations, from millennials to generation alpha through Gen Z. It shook their routines. The habit of studying that they had was turned over. Same goes with the habit of exercise. So they developed unhealthy habits of either using the mobile phone or hanging out with friends excessively, depending on whether the person is introverted or extroverted, respectively. The earlier generations, X and baby boomers, and even the silent generation, couldn't be bothered by coronavirus, and despite the disruption, they still went on along their old habits. Some even died in the process, including my friends. They had the habit of working out at a certain time in the morning, so even coronavirus couldn't stop them. They thought it was just a flu, and some of them died in the process of following their habits. Some of exercise, some of showering in the cold water. Habits die hard for the oldies like us. But in the case of Gen Z and Alpha, the habits were not strongly formed, and they just became like rudderless ships. So in many of my counseling sessions, they come with the problem that they cannot study, and upon further investigation I realized that they have no other problem than the inability to form the habit of studying. And so, by getting information on the environment and preferences, I designed them habits by coming up with a correct trigger, rituals, and rewards. They're amazed and they start to study. That's that simple. My grandfather was a very educated person. He belonged to the greatest generation. In those days, either you studied very well or you are out of the educational system. There was no in between. He recounts his days when studying was so hard and the standards were so high. They had to study under a candlelight during the night in order not to fall asleep. They used to hang their hair to the ceiling through a string. In this way, if they fell asleep, they would be woken up by the pain on their skull. My father-in-law, who belongs to the baby boomer generation, now had electricity to study, so it was a bit easier. But the standard was still high, so it was required that those who studied perfectly. The examiners were very strict. There was no concept of back paper. If you failed in one subject, you had to give all the five subjects or repeat the year. Coming to my generation X, there was this debate that the exams shouldn't be that hard and standard to get a pass grade should be lowered and so on. But still, we need to have good foundations. Also, the number of students was less, and the teachers were able to give full attention to the students. In those days, the teachers didn't have much to do, so they spent their free time interacting with the students and teaching them after class also. The standards were high still. Beginning in the millennial generation, where the concept of entitlement and self-esteem as a basic right started to rise, as I've talked to you earlier on. Consequently, the foundation for studies started to decline. The most obvious destruction in the foundation is observed in the math test, where now you can use a calculator from grade 8 onwards, I think. Even my son cannot do 11 into 11 without using a calculator. So now even basic computation is tough for them. It seems that none of the language teacher nowadays in Gen Z and Alpha bother to check the essays word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. How can they? Because now, if you do that, it will be considered harassment. Just let the poor kid be. It's just a mistake in the comma. What's wrong in using at instead of in? Oh no, it's just a tense error. Don't open Hell's Gate for this simple matter. So you understand how the educational foundation have declined over the generations. In terms of mathematics, the teachers can't force the child to use his logical thinking to understand the step-by-step process of solving a problem, cannot ridicule the student for not using his brain to derive the sub steps of a step that he doesn't understand. Instead, he's supposed to do it for them. He can't question them on how they are missing this skill or knowledge that they should have gotten 3 or 4 grades prior in order to solve this particular problem that they are doing now. That would be outrageous. In this way, we are collectively degrading the foundation of students over the years. I'm sure that there are some students who are able to still excel in studies and building the strong foundation, but that would be not because of the current educational trend, but despite of it. Definitely now they will not be coerced either physically or verbally or even emotionally, but that has a cost on the foundational knowledge required to be an educated person. Adding to that is the misconception that marks are a strong indicator of learning. I'm not saying that they are not, but even in the top universities, in my country, there is a trend because the whole education industry is at risk to give the higher marks in exams, even though they should get less. If so many people fail, then the university will be unpopular and they will lose business. So they need to increase the pass rate and increase the grades. How do you do that? Omit certain mistakes in language and calculations. In this way, as a whole, the university and the various boards can claim that they have a higher standard of education because the results are improving. If it was so, then why is it that it's harder for teachers to teach in higher grades or classes? The students don't get it, but they still get high marks. How come? So we have a defunct system and a delusional society. Ultimately, the students will suffer when they will reach in the job market. They will not be able to write with proper grammar, syntax, and spellings. Oh, I forgot. You have AI to do that. But at least you need to tell AI what to write, and that's also they didn't learn on organizing their ideas. Then they will have to make quick calculations, find out ratios, percentages, understand the relationship between various parameters, integrate various models, but they can because they did not learn it properly when they were in school and college. In the job, they will have to follow standard operating procedures, find out gaps in their skills and learn them, but they wouldn't be able to because they didn't learn procedural thinking and skills properly in their school days. In their job or their businesses, they would have to come up with innovative ideas, but they wouldn't be able to do this synthesizing because their concepts are messed up or incomplete, and they were just focused on getting high marks instead of analyzing, testing the various concepts that was being taught. So, in this way, it's clear that more focus should be put in learning than getting high marks. I call that spoon feeding. Learning can occur only when there is the idea of eating one's own food or self learning and self discovery. As you can see in the diagram, this confusion of marks and actual learning has been the same since the beginning of education. This is because the battle between marks and learning is the battle between status and curiosity. It's an eternal battle. It also occurs in career where we say that money is more important than performance and job satisfaction or learning from the job. Results are more important than the effort. So, in my opinion, this confusion between status and curiosity hasn't changed and is still the same. Another thing that hasn't changed despite our higher living standards is the childhood perception of difficulty. It doesn't matter whether that child doesn't have milk to drink or that child doesn't have a paid version of PUBG. The difficulty perceived by both child is the same. Of course, we can teach the later on that what he calls difficult and painful isn't real as opposed to the child without milk to drink. Nonetheless, the perception of difficulty will always be there in even later generations until the end of time. Every human being thinks and feels that they are important, and that's the way things should be. So, in terms of studies, difficult childhood can work both ways. Some students will use it as a ticket to be motivated, while others will use it as a ticket to be demotivated. All this depends on our hopes for the future. As you can see in the diagram, the generation Z and Alpha are showing lesser hope than the earlier generations. Maybe this is because they have too much information available to them and is painting a gloomy picture of the future. Consequently, it gives them a reason not to study. So, in short, we have to paint a brighter future for the students and infuse in them more hope.